Our story today takes place, as you may have guessed from the image behind me, in Africa. In fact, one of the characters behind me is among the indirect, not direct, protagonists. It's a story of a coup d'etat, of betrayal, but also the story of an attempt to renew a country that was terribly backward in terms of democracy and internal order, as well as in terms of social and infrastructural development, a country that we Italians have come to know quite well because we tried twice to conquer it, and the second time we succeeded, also committing numerous war crimes. But we managed to keep control for just 5 years. A country that until half a century ago was ruled by an absolute monarchy, one of the last. A country that has been celebrated, especially for its religious institutions, by reggae music and by Bob Marley. A country called Ethiopia, and that many years ago in December 1960, 4 free months and the usual satisfaction or your money-back guarantee. Behind me, you can see some great figures from African history. One of them, Tafari Makonnen, the secular name of Haile Selassie. We've already come across him in another video, which you can find on the channel. But this is a story that concerns him in part, but above all his country, Ethiopia. It's a story that takes place 65 years ago, and it's a story about a change that never happened. Are you familiar with chaos theory? The famous butterfly that flaps its wings in Tokyo and causes a typhoon to reach Rio de Janeiro? Well, that's about where we are. What would have happened if? And it was very close for that if to come true. It was really close. Maybe there was a lack of coordination. Maybe there was a lack of decisiveness. Maybe there were those little details scattered here and there that determined the course of history, as has happened on many other occasions. So, our story begins on December 13, 1970. We are in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. At the time, Ethiopia was still an empire that had been restored in 1941 by Haile Selassie himself, leading the Gideon force and the British troops who drove out the Italians, who had dethroned the emperor just 5 years earlier. From that day, from May 1941 to December 1960, almost nothing had changed in Ethiopia. Yes, the Italian civil and military administration was gone. The old nobles had returned. But above all, beyond the presence of a small Italian petty bourgeois class that remained even after fascism was driven out, Ethiopia had always stayed the same. An extremely feudal country, stubbornly anchored to its traditions, impervious to any change. And a politician had noticed this, a young politician, a politician named Germame Neway. He was a man who tried to change things. He was born in 1924 in the height of the empire, in that period that had seen the slow but inexorable transition from the last controls of Queen Zodi II to the rule of Haile Selassie. And little by little, Germame, who had studied, who had made a career within the establishment, realized all these distortions that weren't right, because Ethiopia, yes, had become independent again, but it was anything but a modern state. And Germame had noticed this. After finishing his secondary studies at A.L.S. Lassier School in Addis Ababa, he won a scholarship to the United States. He graduated in literature from Wisconsin University. Then he got a master's degree in social sciences at Columbia in 1954. At the age of 30, Germame returned home. He had made a career in the establishment and became a provincial governor. And that's where his problems began. Problems at work and problems with society. In 1958, Y became governor of the province of Valletta, but he stayed there for only 1 year. In Valletta, he was not wanted, not so much by the population, but by the local notables, the feudal lords, the landowners who saw him as an agitator. He was even called a communist. Then he was transferred to a peripheral region, Ogaden. But even here, the assignment lasted just 1 year. Y tried to bring new elements into his administration. He encouraged citizens to take the lead in social initiatives. He encouraged them to ask the government to build infrastructure, roads, bridges, schools, clinics, hospitals. What was necessary to finally transform Ethiopia into a modern country. But every time, Y ran up against the refusal of the landowners. They didn't want to give up their land or their power, because in a feudal country, in a backward country, owning the land means controlling hunger and therefore the population. Time and again, the landowners had pressured the central government to transfer that troublesome governor, who in the end was assigned to Jijiga, where he came face to face with poverty, a desolate poverty, while the nobles, the landowners, even the Coptic clergy, were literally feasting. The poor were forced to beg for what was left over from the banquets, and sometimes they couldn't even get hold of a bone to gnaw on. Why did the bodyguards and the soldiers stand between them and the leftovers from the banquets, and the poor who swarmed around from time to time, begging with outstretched hands? Just a piece of bread, or a leftover from some lamb that had been cooked? Better to give them to the jackals, to the vultures, those leftovers, rather than give them to the poor. That is, but Neway was shocked by all of this. And he also became convinced of one thing, that in Ethiopia it was not possible to change history, to change society, until the form of government was changed. In Ethiopia, since its restoration, Haile Selassie had imposed true iron-fisted rule. He decided everything by himself, with his crown council and with the government he appointed. Even though abroad Ethiopia could be seen as an autonomous, independent state, even striving toward democracy internally, it was nothing more than a dictatorship, the dictatorship of the emperor. Years later, the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci would report a significant detail. Ethiopia was such a closed and obtuse dictatorship that there was no television. Ethiopia, at that time, always broadcasted the same news bulletin, always with the same running order, always the emperor who had done something, who had inaugurated a railway bridge, who had gone on a visit to a foreign country, or who had passed a law. Even when a great tragedy happened, like a plane crash at Addis Ababa airport, the first words of the radio news were always, "Today, His Most Serene Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, has done." This was Ethiopia. And this Ethiopia, Germame wanted to change it. To succeed, he contacted his brother Mengistu, who, unlike him, was not a civil administrator. Mengistu Neway had made a career in another part of the Ethiopian state apparatus. 5 years older than Germame, Mengistu had become an army officer and had climbed the ranks to become the commander of the Kabur Zabania, the Imperial Guard, the elite corps of the entire Ethiopian army, a corps trained by foreign instructors, mainly Americans and Israelis, because at that time Haile Selassie's Ethiopia mainly listened to two voices abroad, those of Washington and Tel Aviv, the Kabur Zabania. It was a mechanized infantry division, also equipped with tanks, loyal to the emperor to the death and devoted to its commander. Mengistu Neway was not initially so convinced by his brother's plan. First of all, because he knew his subordinates and he knew the fanatical devotion to the emperor. And then because he knew that Ethiopian society struggled to accept major changes. But the plan of the two Neway brothers had also gained the favor of other conspirators who were also within the Ethiopian military machine. For example, Colonel Warkina Agabayao, the head of imperial security, the man to whom Haile Selassie's bodyguards reported, or the chief of police, General Zegedibu. They were the ones who supported Germame Neway in his talks with his brother, convincing Germame and Mengistu of the full cooperation of other parts of the establishment for the coup. It must be said, however, that even though the coup had been prepared months in advance, more than one conspirator feared that their plans might leak, that suddenly the Ethiopian secret police could arrest them all. This is the case of Colonel Warkina Agabayao, who repeatedly suspects that the head of the political police, Makonnen Abde Abdewold, might intervene. But Makonnen does in fact sense something. There are details he can't understand in certain movements of both the Imperial Guard and the Emperor's bodyguards. And he can't even understand why Colonel Agabayao turned to the Israeli military attachés in Addis Ababa for supposed counterinsurgency plans. Are you familiar with Operation Valkyrie? The famous film from several years ago about the attempted coup on July 20th, 1944 by German officers against Hitler. It's the same story. In this case, too, a counterinsurgency plan is taken and used to orchestrate a coup. Colonel Agabayao talks with the Israeli military advisors and asks them to point out the critical points of the capital, those that, in their opinion, could be at risk in the event of a coup or a sudden invasion by a foreign country. This activity by Agabayao does not go unnoticed by Macon and Nabdewald, who write a couple of reports, but the emperor dismisses them as nonsense, as mere chatter. The emperor is certain of the full loyalty of all his men, of the Chebura Zabinia, of his imperial guard. He is so sure of it that he calmly leaves for Brazil for a state visit. At the beginning of December 1960, however, that departure alarms the Neway brothers. Germame goes to Mengistu and says, "My brother the emperor has left, but he has left all his spies here, starting with Macon Nabdewald. Maybe the emperor has left Ethiopia temporarily to give Macon a free hand to arrest us, torture us, and make us disappear. It's time to take action." Mengistu is convinced. We need to take advantage of the emperor's absence to put their plan into action. A complex, diabolical plan like Operation Valkyrie. Mengistu calls the commanders of the Imperial Guard and explains an intervention plan to them. A plan that aims to safeguard the emperor's security by removing the government which is wrongly accused of being made up of, infiltrated by rebels, dissenters, agitators. But that's not true. It's not like that. But only the Neway brothers and their accomplices know this. On the morning of December 13, 1960, the ministers of the imperial crown and other high-ranking officials, including Macon and Abde Nabdewod, including Major General Mugeta Bulli, a very popular general within the army, are summoned for an emergency meeting at Genitel Ul Palace. They don't know it's a trap. As soon as they enter the palace, ministers and military officials are seized and placed under arrest. Meanwhile, the Imperial Guard deploys throughout the city, surrounds the other barracks, tries to take control of the airport, takes control of the Little Gibi, the Imperial Palace, and the radio station. Haile Selassie hasn't landed in Rio de Janeiro yet. While on board, an Israeli radio operator warns him, "There's been a coup in Addis Ababa. It's best for the emperor not to land in Brazil. It's better for him to turn back. But not in Ethiopia yet. It's better for him to land in Liberia, where an ally ready to cooperate with him is waiting. That ally is Isser Harel. He's the head of Mossad. He's the man who coordinated the capture of Adolf Eichmann. We've already talked about him in another video you can find on the channel. Harel is already on his way to Monrovia to welcome the imperial jet on the runway of the Liberian capital's airport. In the meantime, Harel has already instructed all the Israeli military advisors not to move. In fact, to talk to their Ethiopian subordinates and to convince them that the coup is not meant to preserve the emperor, but to dethrone him and maybe even kill him. The first part of the Neway brothers' plan is about to fail. But the Neway brothers have an ace up their sleeve because among the hostages is the crown prince, Aspa-Vossen, and it is he who is taken to the Ethiopian national radio on the morning of December 14, 1960, to deliver a proclamation. A rather strange proclamation because Aspa-Vossen, in his proclamation, publicly denounces the chronic social and economic problems that have afflicted Ethiopia for decades. Aspa-Vossen says in his speech that in practically 3 millennia, the average Ethiopian has not managed to progress, and that it was natural for the great masses made up of poor people to be losing patience and thinking about revolting. But before then, Aspa-Vossen, even though he was the crown prince and did not enjoy great fame within the imperial court, had always stayed on the sidelines. The first question that both the emperor and his Israeli military advisors ask themselves is whether the crown prince did all this in collusion with the Neway brothers. Did he do it because he was deceived, or was he forced to do it at gunpoint? The only positive response to Aspa Vassen's radio proclamation comes from the university students, who openly demonstrate their support for the coup and demand freedom of speech, freedom of the press, new infrastructure, new hospitals, new funds for studies. They will be disappointed. Between December 14 and 15, 1960, while the conspirators still can't figure out how to proceed, also because, in the meantime, the paratroopers have been convinced by their Israeli instructors to take control of the airport themselves. Right in those 24 hours, Mengistu and his brother begin to see the first defections. The idea of appointing Mugeta Bulli as head of the army doesn't work. The idea of proclaiming greater freedom of speech doesn't work. The idea of loudly demanding an agrarian reform doesn't work. And why is that? Because the counter-revolutionaries are already at work. Because in the meantime, the loyalists, in addition to relying on the Israeli instructors present on site, have already convinced the army's only armored brigade to side with them. And they have convinced the religious authority, Buna Basilios, the head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, to side with them. Buna's proclamations are distributed as flyers throughout Addis Ababa. The citizens who can read those flyers and spread the word. The rest is handled by some trucks equipped with loudspeakers, sent through the streets by the loyalists, defying the Imperial Guard. Trucks that broadcast the voice of Buna Basilios from those loudspeakers, who excommunicates the rebels, who clearly states that the rebels are opponents of the emperor, apostates, enemies of Ethiopia and of the faith. That alone is enough to make the coup fail. While the emperor lands in Asmara, which is safe and in the hands of the loyalists, fighting breaks out throughout the capital. It is December 16, 1960. The coup fails. Many soldiers of the Kabur Zabanja, the Imperial Guard, realize they have been deceived, that they have been betrayed. They are not fighting for the emperor, they are fighting against the emperor. For this reason, the soldiers of the Imperial Guard surrender and hand over their weapons. They declare that they have been deceived by their superiors. The fighting lasts just one afternoon, enough time for the leaders to commit their final crime. Germame and Mengistu, at the palace of Nenetalahul, point their weapons at their hostages. They kill 15 of them. The Prime Minister Aragai dies. The head of internal intelligence, Makom Makonnen Abdawad, dies. General Bulli dies. They are the last victims of a coup that has failed. From that moment on, there is only escape. Some commit suicide. That's the case of Colonel Warshena Gabayao. He puts a gun to his temple and blows his brains out. Some are killed in the fighting. The chief of police is found dead on a barricade that had been built by his own men. Mengistu and Germame Neway flee. They try somehow to reach Kenya, but their escape lasts just a week. It's Christmas Eve 1960 when the army manages to find and surround them. The two Neway brothers don't want to be captured. They don't want to face the shame of a trial, let alone a firing squad. Mengistu pulls out his revolver and shoots Germame. His last words to his brother are, "Forgive me." After killing Germame, Mengistu turns the gun on himself, but is disarmed before he can fire the fatal shot. He is only wounded. He is purged, taken to Addis Ababa, summarily tried, and hanged in a public square. But he is not alone on that scaffold. Next to him, the next day, there is also the corpse of Germame. He too is hanged, already dead. The bodies of the Neway brothers remain there, in Addis Ababa's main square for 3 months, as a warning that the emperor does not forgive. To make it clear that the Ethiopian system is eternal, it cannot change. The failed coup of December 1960 costs about 2,000 lives, for nothing to change. Haile Selassie. He will remain on the throne for almost 15 more years, becoming increasingly deaf to the call for change, for reforms, for progress, for public works for his country, more and more determined to rule with an iron fist. And there will be another Mengistu Haile Mariam, several years later, to dethrone him. This Mengistu is also a military man, but he is not a dreamer like the Neway brothers. He is a sympathizer of the Soviet Union, and he intends to take the reins of Ethiopia not to turn it into a modern state, but to turn it into another kind of dictatorship, from the personal dictatorship of the emperor to the military dictatorship of a junta. And that's what Mengistu Haile Mariam will do, dethroning Haile Selassie, relegating him to a small room in the little Gibi, and finally having him assassinated one night with a pillow pressed over his face, then having him buried in the bathroom of the same imperial palace. An inglorious end for the King of Kings, the king, the heir of Solomon, the millennial emperor, an end that, however, if we want to read it with a touch of irony, it was natural for the man who had wanted at all costs to be the absolute master of the land of Judah, and who in the end was betrayed by that military class that he himself had supported as the absolute support of his regime, and that turned against him, first with the Neway brothers, and then with the Derg, the junta. And this teaches us something, that dictatorships always need military support to exist. But when the military changes its mind, and it can happen, then there's no more room for dictators, there's no more respite, there's not even what is called Christian mercy. Welcome back to Dentro la Storia, the channel for those who love contemporary history. By now, you've known for quite some time. In addition to our channel, which has been active for more than 4 years, and our podcast platform, we've also launched our official website, Dentro la Storia, where you can find all our content, our articles, our in-depth features, and 2 other special sections. The first is our exclusive eShop, where you can make purchases if you wish. Our gadgets and our clothing, if you want to dress like us, if you especially want to give us a hand. On a financial level, to continue developing a product of the highest quality and with great, always new content. The other instead is completely free, and it's our monthly newsletter, which arrives at the beginning of each month in the email inbox of our subscribers, with lots of content. I can't spoil all of them for you. Otherwise, what's the point of telling you? In that case, I shouldn't even send the newsletter. But if you're curious, go to the Dentro la Storia website, request your copy of the exclusive newsletter in the dedicated area. And then if you want, let us know what you think about it.